Hello, you. You're listening to A History of Italy. Special interview episode on the novel The Toscanini Conspiracy.
E non posso più accucciarmi e così ritorno su. Lascio I colli nelle valli tra due salici piangenti. Io ritrovo la speranza di un amore che ormai fu.
In September 1935, world-renowned doctor Alberto Rinaldi is walking home from his visits in the small Tuscan town of Piazze. Suddenly, out of the darkness, he's attacked and later dies in his home. 14 years later, in the new republic born on the ashes of the Fascist Regime, President of the Republic, Luigi Einaudi, is busy choosing potential candidates to become senators for life. His second choice falls upon the great conductor, Arturo Toscanini. But, as he opens the files, he discovers something very troubling. Arturo Toscanini was present in Piazze at the time of the murder of Alberto Rinaldi. This starts an investigation by retired military man Luigi Mari that will uncover a trail of suspicion and deceit and get to the heart of the mystery of the Toscanini conspiracy. We took some time to speak to the author of the Toscanini conspiracy, Filippo Iannarone. So, Filippo, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
It's good to have you. It's good to have you. So, first of all, can you tell us something about your background? You're Italian, obviously, but you don't live in Italy anymore. So tell us something about your life story, which is always interesting.
I was born in Rome. I spent all my years in school, in a Jesuit school in Rome, and then I studied history of law in university. And then that was the reason why I started to work in archive in the Vatican. And so since I was a child, I was passionate of history. And I continued all my life doing other profession, even doing tourist business. And now when I retired from the business, I decided to give space to
your passion and your hobbies, finally.
And the life of my uncle, that was a famous general in Italy after the Second World War, a sort of civil servant, and the main character of my novels is inspired to him.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that was something I was curious about. Yeah, we'll get to that
later.
So before we look at the actual book, can you give us some background to the period we're talking about? Because you know very, very well, but not all of the listeners of A History of Italy do, that basically at the end and also for a period after the Second World War, Italy was almost thrown into a civil war.
You are absolutely right. I could say the Civil War, in fact, started with the fall of the fascist regime, and went on not only until the end of the war, that was April 1945, but was for all the 40s a real problem. The institutions of the state were unable to control the criminality that was around in both factions. The communist, socialist, aggressive resistance partisans, and the fascist and the people that was in favor of the republic created by Mussolini in the north of Italy. And the pacification between the two parts was tempted by Palmiro Togliatti, that was the leader of the Communist Party. He makes a sort of amnesty for the crimes perpetrated in the past years of the war, but that was not successful. Unfortunately, there are not many books about that. There are not many studies. The most one are quite recent. And I have to say, this is a lack in in the historiographic of Italy, and I do hope that in the future that could be studied much better than it has been done until now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes we are afraid of looking under certain stories because obviously the resistance is very important for us. It's the foundation of our constitution. It's something we as Italians are very proud of because in the end, it put us on the right side of history in a certain sense. But at the same time, we've kind of turned away from the darker sides of what was the resistance. And just because there were a lot of, let's say, negative aspects and tragic aspects also in the resistance, it doesn't mean it wasn't a great moment in Italian history. At the same time, we have
Well,
a historical obligation to explore that
the
more in depth.
trouble is and was originated by the fact that the left wing of the resistance, that was the majority at that time, uh, was frauded because the people believed that liberation of Italy from Nazi fascists means also the start of the revolution, a revolution to give power to the people, a sort of socialist revolution like it was in Russia in the 1917 and the following years. But that was not. And this disillusion, by my point of view, increased the feeling of hate, of wishing, of
Of
revenge.
frustration, yeah.
Was a really frustration moment. And that I describe in one of the next books that I hope will be published also in
Oh, great.
English.
Yeah, that's something I think really English language material needs to shed more of a light on Italian, on the Italian resistance and the
Uh,
post-war
yes,
stories.
also because the role of United States intelligences in that time was quite strong.
Oh, yeah. And up until and beyond also the 70s.
Honestly, I have read speeches done by the ambassador Dunn in the late 40s, and you can read already some very important chapters of the actual history. So this wish of autonomy, independence, isolation of United States from Europe, but at the same time, the interest of United States to find in Europe important economical resources. A good argument to study better that period.
Yeah, yeah, especially because we have to remember that Italy was kind of a battleground in the Cold War. So it's very important also
Yeah,
in that sense.
was not in Italy, so was not only in Italy, for example, this role of United States intelligence, together also with the English one, was also in Greece, for
Hmm.
example, and partially was in France, where, of course, the nationalism of French people was enough to dominate any uh,
Factional fighting, let's say, or
exactly any fighting
mm.
so evident and so large as it was in Italy.
Yeah. So the novel talks about an actual murder that really occurred in 1935, the murder of a well-known and controversial doctor, Alberto Rinaldi. And I was
Yeah,
reading the book. I like because my doctor's name is Rinaldi as well, but
right.
it's a woman, so a totally different story. So how did you manage? Because it must have been very complicated to try and mix the actual facts, which sometimes are very obscure, and the fictional aspects. How did you manage that balance?
Uh, so the novel is looking to two period frames. That 30s, that it's the period of the relationship between Dottor Rinaldi and Arturo Toscanini and many others, and then the 40s when the investigation on this cold case came out. I have to say I was very much helped in my research by the presence of historical documents. I mean, the press was really nearly daily busy in reporting the case that was going on in the justice court. And not only I was able to find the document of the case, of the Justice Court case, um, in Bologna, and then a part was also in the archive of the President of Republic at the Quirinale in Rome. And this is the second frame, so the late 40, the investigation, and was not very difficult to combine the two stories and to have this fusion of periods, because at the end, the feeling that is behind the two frames is the same, is the courage to follow the truth, is the courage to research the truth at any cost. And that is the same that has done Dr. Rinaldi, and the same that is done by the investigators, the Colonel Mari.
Excellent. Okay. So aside from Dr. Rinaldi, who is this kind of in the background, he's haunting the situation. He's like Hamlet's father's ghost in the background. And then we have the investigating protagonist, Luigi Mari, who you were actually telling me is based on your uncle. So it's inspired by a real person. Then there's his wife, who also has an important role in the investigation. And then this sidekick, which is also a very nice figure, which is the Carabiniere Barbetti. So the other big presence is that of the famous conductor Arturo Toscanini. Okay,
Yeah.
Can you fill us in a little bit about Toscanini? Because quite an impressive person.
Well, Toscanini it was so impressive that he gives rules to behave in the theaters, for example, rules that we apply still now. So he was so precise. He didn't want applause during the plays. He prohibited to wear large hats for the ladies, because that made impossible to the view for the people behind. And at the theater in the past was used to have something to drink, something to eat, no, like in our days, or happens in the
In the
cinema.
cinema, yeah, with
Yeah.
popcorn and
Well, all that was at the end, but that was derivated by the authority, the musical, artistic authority of Toscanini. He was really a genius.
yeah.
And all his friendships, it's a witness that he was a great musician. I guess with von Karajan, for example, he was one of the best director in the 20th century. And that's the reason why he worked all around the world. He was first successful in South America, and then after his success in South America, he came to Italy and was successful as well, and then went to United States for long tourney, and then decided to establish himself in New York.
Yeah, also after his, let's say, opposition to the fascist regime as well. And we have to add that
He
Toscanini
had
was
the
famous.
courage. He had the courage not only to oppose to the fascist regime, but also to Hitler. He was personally invited by Adolf Hitler to play as conductor in Bayreuth, because he refused to play anymore in Bayreuth. And the video of Wagner asked Toscanini, but was unsuccessful. And then the video of Wagner asked to Adolf Hitler, say his powerful role could influence Toscanini, but Toscanini say straight, no, nine.
Fantastic.
I will not come to Bayreuth anymore until you are in charge. And that gives how great the impression, how great was his
His influence
prestige,
is, yeah, his
his
prestige, yeah.
influence. No,
Yeah.
a
Also,
man that say no to the most powerful person in Europe at that time. No, Adolf Hitler, and not only Benito Mussolini. That, of course, I want not to spoil something that it's in the book.
Yeah, then I'll ask you
But
about the story in a second.
it's a famous um, fight in Bologna when Toscanini refused to play after the Italian uh, hymn,
Anthem, yeah.
the royal march, to play the Giovinezza, Giovinezza, that was the hymn of the fascists. He
Yes.
refused.
And he was beaten by the fascists for that.
He was beaten by the fascists. Uh, he was really aggressed by the fascists in his hotel in Bologna. It was, and up from that time, he decided to make very rare presence in Italy, and he has no more directed anything else in Italy until he made the first concert in 1946 for the reopening of La Scala, Teatro La Scala in Milan, that was seriously damaged by the bombing in the Second World War. And it was a memorable concert that he directed, but that was not only his role. He collected a lot of funds to restore the Teatro La Scala. So we have to be grateful that this institution, to Toscanini, if this institution was
That
saved
exists
by the
today,
damage
and we
and
can.
ruins of the war. And that's why the foyer of La Scala is dedicated to Arturo Toscanini.
Fantastic. And you mentioned he worked also. He started off in South America. I always think it's incredible the story of how he started, because he's a 19-year-old musician. The
Yeah.
two, not one, but two orchestra directors had abandoned the situation, and he was convinced by his colleagues and friends to just pick up the director's baton, the director's stick, and start directing from memory. That's one thing about incredible. He never
You are
used any
right.
sheet
All
music.
right.
He did everything. He had this photographic memory, and it had been one of his teachers originally who had realized that this kid, the 6 or 7 year old kid, could play, after hearing once a piece of music, could play it by heart.
Yeah, that was wonderfully described by Harvey Sachs in his biography of Arturo Toscanini. Harvey Sachs is a writer, author that lives in New York. Um, and in his books about Toscanini, and he describes the development of this genius, because he really was so passionate about what he directed. Of course, he had not an easy behavior, easy character. He was also very passionate. He was native from Parma, and the people of Emilia Romagna is always very passionate.
Ah,
No,
yes, yes. My father is a native, so I know.
right. So, um, and there are famous stories about how intolerant he was when the music was not going in the perfect way he designed in his mind. He was able to direct a full opera without reading music.
Fantastic.
His rehearsal were memorable because were absolutely perfect after that he was directing, conducting the orchestra.
Great. Fantastic.
And that was worldwide.
Yeah. So we've set the scene with some of the characters, some of the main characters, Dr. Rinaldi, Luigi Mari, the
Yeah.
investigator, and of course Toscanini. So without obviously spoilers, tell us about the story, please, Filippo.
Well, the story is that Toscanini followed the advice of his doctor when he was no more possible, when for him was no more possible to conduct, because he had a terrible arthritis in his heart, in one of his arm, the right arm. And the doctor advised him to visit this country doctor in
Yeah.
a village in Tuscany. But the country doctor was a scientist as well. He was researching about his medicaments against arthritis for years. And that bring to him a very high fame, high reputation and fame. He was the doctor of the Prince Boncompagni. He was the doctor of the daughter of Giuseppe Garibaldi. He was the doctor of Maurizio Gucci, Salvatore Ferragamo, just to mention some Italians. But also the daughter of Mark Twain was in therapy by uh, Dr. Rinaldi.
And it seems originally he discovered this cure by accident because he was looking into actually tuberculosis, if I'm not mistaken, when he
That
discovered
was the
the.
start. That was the start.
Mhm.
But after the start, he had a serious feeling to keep the secret about his researches and particularly about the composition and the uh, doses of his medicament.
Okay, so Toscanini goes to Rinaldi.
Toscanini goes to Rinaldi, and just after the first injection, he feels incredibly better. He feels that like a miracle. And he started to have a sort of gratitude in front of Rinaldi, immense, so immense that he will return many times to follow the therapy. He will follow the therapy. He followed the therapy also in during his periods in United States or in the other parts of Europe. But his focus was to be back in Cetona, to be back to Piazze, to Dr. Rinaldi, because was not only for the therapies but also for the friendship. And and it seems that he got a very nice period together with Dr. Rinaldi until, of course, the murder in September 1935. He was witness there. He was present there in that terrible night.
And then many years later, our hero Luigi Mari is asked to investigate that murder
Yeah,
and Toscanini's possible involvement.
yeah. The death of Rinaldi, of course, cancelled any possibility for Toscanini to return to Piazza and Cetona. And the investigation was difficult since the first moment. There were no witnesses, and there was a case in Justice Court that was quite complicated. First was in Florence and then was moved to Brescia because of political reasons. But 14 years later, the new president of the Republic, the first president of Italian Republic, Einaudi, decided to apply for the first time the new rules of the new constitution. He had the power to nominate 5 senators alive. And he decided that the first 2 were just a famous mathematics teacher, professor, Nino Castelnuovo, and the very famous Arturo Toscanini. But of course, you have to be sure that when you are president of the republic and you nominate somebody for such important role as senator alive,
You got
that
the right guy.
is to be immaculate. Unfortunately, in the files of regarding the life of Toscanini, there were some stories that were a bit not comfortable for the president of the republic. In particular, there was this document of the Carabinieri that said Toscanini had a relationship, a friendship with Dr. Rinaldi, and he was present the night of the murder.
Which
But the sentences that Carabinieri used was quite doubtful. And that was the start of the request of better investigation about that murder, about that night.
Excellent. And so then if we want to know more, obviously, we're going to have to get a hold of the Toscanini conspiracy. So you mentioned before, that if we want to, if the readers, as well as obviously reading the book, would like to know a little bit more about the context, etc. So you mentioned before, for example, the Sachs biography of Toscanini. In general, what sources would you suggest if people want to learn more about this period in history?
If they want to read period novels, I suggest Pepe Fenoglio with his two books, and which are translated in English. Some of the few ones translated in English, and that it's about the period of resistance, etc. About Toscanini, you mentioned already Harvey Sachs' biographies, and there is another book about the period that it's a civil war by Claudio Pavone that it's still available in US, and that it's a great view open in on that years.
Fantastic. And of course, the most important source to purchase is the Toscanini conspiracy. Filippo, can you please tell us where we can find it, when we can find it, and maybe also the Italian, and tell us something about the English translation?
The book is recently available, and is a translation by Laurie Etherington, which is a American lady that lives in Florence since many years. The book you can find in your preferred bookshops or on Amazon, of course, and in paperback and ebook.
Fantastic. Filippo, thank you so much for dedicating the time to us today.
Thank you, Mike. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Filippo Iannarone, and remember to pick up your copy of the Toscanini Conspiracy. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, arrivederci.